Hello, I'm Bonnie Bay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, Beijing+20 and the UN Commission on the Status of Women. The two-week conference came to a close late this week with a renewed commitment to achieve gender equality in nations around the world.
We want gender equality. When do we want it?
Thousands of women and men marched through the streets of New York to commemorate International Women's Day. International political leaders and directors of grassroots non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, met to review how women round the world have made progress or not toward gender parity. That in the 20 years since the 1995 UN Beijing Conference and its declaration and platform for action, it is seen as the key global policy document on gender equality. UN Women hosted a gala, Planet 50/50 by 2030. Step It Up for Gender Equality, to mark the 20th anniversary. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton told the audience an idea once considered groundbreaking is now routine.
It is no longer acceptable to discuss women's rights as separate from human rights. This anniversary, 20 years since the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, is a moment to celebrate our progress, but also to recommit ourselves to the work ahead, because we know we really aren't there yet.
Women in the United States are being economically smothered.
That message from Academy Award-winning actor Patricia Arquette, who said, "We're not there yet in the United States on equal pay or gender equality."
And let's join the 175 countries in making sex equality a constitutional right by finally passing the Equal Rights Amendment in this country.
Women activists who had been at the Beijing conference 20 years ago came to the United Nations last week and brought along a lot of young women who will continue the fight for parity.
I've had an incredible opportunity to learn from world leaders, NGOs, etc., but I'm really here to make sure that girls' voices are heard and that we don't leave girls out of implementation of the Beijing Action Platform in the next 20 years.
The U.S. mission to the UN, the Feminist Majority Foundation, and Girls Learn International held an intergenerational dialogue to shape an agenda for equality looking forward. I had the honor to speak on a panel that included leaders in the women's movement who attended the Beijing conference, as well as women who weren't even born 20 years ago. U.S. Representative Carolyn Maloney led the U.S. delegation to Beijing.
Beijing was so exciting, and we came out with our platform for action, and today we are at the United Nations reviewing what we've accomplished, what lies ahead. And some things have not changed. We are among two countries that have not ratified CEDAW, which is a comprehensive agreement to protect women and to give them education and health care. Totally non-controversial. Why can't we ratify that important treaty for women of the world? And secondly, in women's rights, equality, we are among 32 countries do not have an Equal Rights Amendment.
Representative Maloney says, as in the past, much change may take place at the grassroots level.
In changing women's roles and their rights, it's very much dependent on independent NGOs, which we had in Beijing. And when you are dependent on the NGOs, it's because the government is not doing it. So if the government won't act, the women groups are acting to help other women. We are making progress.
Neera Tanden, welcome to the panel. As the head of a major NGO, how far have we come in 20 years?
As women across the globe, we've come a long distance, I would say.
There have been great strides, particularly in education, health, and the well-being of women. But if you look at certain countries, women are no better off now than they were 20 years ago.
No reason to bring out the champagne here in the U.S., not until we ratify the Women's Treaty and an Equal Rights Amendment.
Well, we've come a long way, but we have a ways to go. I'll agree with that. And I think one thing we could do for that is get women's groups talking about things more and making women's issues everyone's issues across the globe.
I want to get to all the issues that came out, particularly in the Clinton Gates report about data on where women are and why we're behind. But first I want to start with the United States, because I did cover Beijing in '95, and there was no question we were the world's leader on women's issues. There was no better country to live in than the United States as a woman if you wanted to get an education, get ahead, etc. Now we're number 20 according to the World Economic Forum. Why has that happened?
Well, some things that folks aren't going to want to talk about, which is the everyday affordability and long-term financial security for women in this country is not so great. And that has to do with our taxation and regulation system. That has to do with some of the jobs that were traditionally held by women now being outsourced or now being less available. And just I think on the broader scale, it's because other women in other countries have progressed. So yes, we were number 1, but if we have to slide a little bit, not to 20, but a little bit, because other countries are coming up and they're seeing the same kinds of democratic and health-related improvements that our women have enjoyed over the years, then we should celebrate that. But I have to say, over the last 20 years, Bonnie, we've had 12 of those 20 years have been Democratic presidents, and I think that the question falls to them. They run on such a gender-centric, war on women, abortion, contraception, women, and then they get there, and here's where we are.
Well, I think actually if you look at some of the ways we're dealing with economic security issues, we're really far behind. So we're one of a handful of countries in the globe that has no paid leave for parents, mother or father, as a national policy. I mean, we're up there with Oman and other countries like that. There's no country that's a developed country that doesn't have those policies. So
but if you look at, if you break down the WEF, which I keep referring to it because it's the one that everyone, World Economic Forum Gender Parity Index, we're fine on health and education. I mean, in terms of comparison to other countries. Where we're really bad is women in elected office, national elected office, and women's participation in business.
Right, and women's leadership writ large. And one of the challenges is that we make it so difficult for women to balance work and family that women in the U.S. come out of the workforce and then don't reattach at the same rate that men do and women do in other countries. And so that's one of the challenges. It's hard to move up the ladder if you have to come out for a long time and you can't come back in. So I think we actually have to recognize, broaden the lens to recognize issues like paid leave, sick days, actually disproportionately affect women's advancement. And that's one of the challenges that we're facing.
Well, unfortunately we lag so far behind in leadership, speaking on that topic for a moment, we have so few women in positions of power in the United States. And again,
20% of the Congress.
Indeed. And when we have few women legislators, we have fewer women in C-suites. I think that's a real problem, especially as these other countries are coming up and putting their women at the top.
So what's the solution?
The solution is just simply awareness about it, getting more women to run. There are initiatives out there that I'm so proud to be a part of. She should run. Really great. Just asking women around you to reconsider. Say, hey, just because you've had a child doesn't mean you've got to stay at home. You can go run and you can make a difference by entering Congress. So that is what's going to change things.
Well, our moral obligation to have women in leadership parity is as great as our moral obligation to raise the minimum wage and make life better for women who are not going to be in the C-suites.
But I have to throw a question out here.
Yeah.
How much of our falling behind is due to the Christian right influence in American politics?
A ton.
I know you're going to scoff at it, but I think that...
How so? Could you explain that?
A ton. A ton.
No, I don't need the
things
the
are
screed.
hyper-polarized now, even on issues outside of reproductive rights. You have the Violence Against Women Act was being stalled repeatedly by the right. Recently, in recent sessions, you have issues like pay equity that has broad support among voters.
The White House pays women less than it pays men. These are great talking points.
We have hold on. You have nearly 80% of voters agreeing that we should have some kind of Paycheck Fairness Act, and you have Republicans refusing to bring that to the floor. So that's really important.
So this had to become
and then we look at reproductive rights, and it's an absolute crisis in this country. 231
Have you told President Obama any of this? Speaker Pelosi, who lost her job?
231 new laws in the last 4 years restricting the right to abortion in this country. There has been a dramatic uptick in religious
and they
right
ran on
control,
this.
And
they ran on this. By the way, everybody who's for reasonable restrictions on abortion on demand, which your party agrees with, abortion anytime, anyone, anywhere, we will oppose any. Excuse me, it is. There's absolutely no. Then ask every Democratic candidate.
Support
no, they threw out the Christian right. She had 3 minutes to attack them.
But let me
Name
ask you
5
this
prominent
question.
pro-life women in this country. Go. Pro-life Democratic women in this country. You can't. We can sit here all day. They don't exist anymore.
Republican women, actually.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. And they have a comfortable place in the Republican Party. We have 6 female senators. 3 are pro-choice, 3 are pro-life. There are no pro-choice women.
I mean, Heidi Heitkamp has a mixed record, as you saw this week on the
But wait a second. Let me steer us back because I really don't.
They ran on this in 2014. It failed.
Okay. Gender violence, a major issue now internationally. Wasn't there 20 years ago. What's going on with that?
somehow female genital mutilation still exists. And that to me is really, really crazy that today we're still dealing with that issue in certain countries where we, the United States, should have led the way and said these atrocities should not be permitted anymore. DV across the globe. I think even the numbers here speak to the fact that we've not done enough. And I think on both sides of the aisle there are people advocating for taking on these issues, but there's just not enough attention.
I think it would be a great issue for a First Lady to take up, really.
Absolutely.
I mean, why not? Instead of telling my kids not to eat French fries and do jumping jacks, let's have less genital mutilation around the world.
Actually, when she traveled to Africa, she actually talked about genital mutilation. But I think this is an area where it actually matters how much in our foreign policy we're talking about these issues. In Afghanistan, around the world, I don't think these are partisan issues, but it is a question of leadership.
But also at home. I mean, this
Absolutely.
whole campus rape. I mean, I was in college in the 70s. Nobody talked about it. I don't think it was happening. And I actually asked Gloria Steinem, why this explosion now?
Oh,
and
I
she
don't
said,
think it wasn't happening.
No,
I think women are talking about it.
I asked her, was it going on then and nobody talked about it, or was it not going on at the level it seems to be going on now? And she said, nobody knows the answer.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But I think what's interesting and different is that people are coming out, stepping out, talking about their experiences, and it's emboldening other people, which is good, and we should encourage that.
Your thoughts?
Absolutely. The more we talk about violence, the more we're going to be aware of violence. And so it's actually a good thing if we're being aware of, statistics going up. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is there's some recent numbers out showing around the world how a number of women are actually very comfortable with the idea of spousal abuse and relationship abuse. And this goes to the heart of why we need to change gender norms around the world. And it's a two-part issue, right? I mean, part of it is really just addressing culture. And so working in schools, working in faith-based organizations, all of those things. But it also has to be stricter laws and more enforcement of the existing laws we have in the books.
Let's be honest, a free and open internet has got us to where we are. People are so much more empowered to speak about their experiences. I think this rise in reporting is purely due to the fact that people are following other behaviors. They're modeling behaviors.
And the internet in the U.S. anyway is clearly a font of trafficking. I mean, that's a large part of, that's how girls are, they're tricked into relationships and smuggled for sex
For all
trafficking.
the bad it does, there's a lot of good. And with that, I mean, now we're in airports walking down, escalators and seeing huge billboards saying, this is the face of sex trafficking. And it's a girl who looks like she's just from anywhere USA. And so I think that's important.
Your thoughts?
No, human trafficking, sex trafficking is huge. And, it does affect, it's everybody from the bored, spoiled rich girl to the girl who doesn't know her parents and didn't really have many educational opportunities. But talk about a bipartisan issue. It's one that I think, they need to give more, I think more voice and visibility should go to it. But, when it's politicized, I feel like it just hurts the women.
All right, let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter, @BonnieRBay. From the status of women to Hillary Clinton's role as a women's advocate. And now, some closer scrutiny on a related topic, the Hillary Doctrine. As Hillary Clinton defined her self-named doctrine, it is, quote, the subjugation of women is a threat to the common security of our world and to the national security of our country, end quote. Clinton is widely expected to formally announce her candidacy for the U.S. presidency next month. But after it was revealed that her family foundation took money from some of the worst perpetrators of global gender bias, including Algeria, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and of course Saudi Arabia, voters are questioning what she has really done for women. The Clinton Foundation website is filled with information on partnerships with NGOs it has made and stories of women it has helped access education, agricultural necessities, and a host of other donations. So has she helped, women all over the world, or is she just talking about it?
I think Secretary and First Lady and Senator Clinton has helped some women around the world, there's no question. But if she's going to run a gender-centric, almost narrow-casted campaign, I think it's going to fail. Because women in this country don't just ask, do you share my gender? That's interesting and unique and a good way to get your poll numbers spiked up at the beginning. But after a while, they want to know, do you share my vision, my values, my position on issues? And I think the biggest problem for her, do you share my connective tissue? Do we have something to relate to? And I think part of why she got so tripped up in the email press conferences because we hadn't heard from her in 4 or 5 months. I'd love to tell you that Hillary's policies for this country are absolutely wrong, but I have no idea what they are. She's in this hermetically sealed silo in a cave, and then she comes out. The only time we hear her voice is to give a $300,000 speech, which is more than the average woman in the married household makes in over 5 years, unmarried household more than 7 years. She doesn't have connective tissue with women.
Well, I actually think if you look at her poll numbers, women are amongst her strongest supporters, and part of that is because she hasn't been hermetically sealed. People have seen her for 20 years, and they've seen her fight for child care in the 90s, child care in the 2000s, and I'm sure she'll fight for that if she runs for president. She's talked about paid leave in the past. She'll talk about it in the future. She's talked about these issues, and actually as senator advocated for them, and as first lady advocated for them. So I think she actually has a long record, both in the United States and as Secretary of State, working on issues that affect women. But I absolutely agree. It matters what she does as a candidate to describe her vision. I do think people will connect with it.
But what about the foundation taking money from Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all those countries where the laws
I find this fascinating, right? Because
women.
We've had presidents from both parties go to Saudi Arabia and literally or figuratively kiss the ring of the Saudi king. Both parties. President Bush did it. People thought he was very accommodating to the Saudis. President Obama has visited several times. So, and as Secretary of State, Hillary actually had to deal with the Saudis. Saudi Arabia, for good or ill, is considered an ally of the U.S.
But right? Wait, okay, but you raise a number of points. First of all, taking money from the Saudis while she was Secretary of State. If that, to me, presents a huge ethics problem. And secondly, there's a real question to be asked. If you're taking money from these people, how can you advocate for women? I mean, they're so terrible to their women.
This will be a great test, though, because she will be, if she runs, which I assume she will, if she runs for president, you'll see what her record is and what she's fighting for. And Secretary of State, whatever happened with the foundation, she went to the Saudis and criticized them about their policies. She was very vocal, the most vocal Secretary of State ever on women's issues around the globe. So if we saw a conflict, it would have existed already.
I just see a huge problem here as a self-labeled moderate Republican woman, as somebody who still is a millennial, watching her as First Lady and actually admiring her for a number of years. I'm so disappointed after this email scandal, primarily because how could she...
I don't want to talk about... Let me just... everybody's talking about
character,
that.
Exactly.
I'm talking about the Saudis and the
Saudis,
the
whoever.
Money.
It's all about money. She cares about the bottom line. She cares about getting paid for these speeches. She cares about riding on fancy jets. And I think she's out of touch with the average American woman.
I mean, with all due respect, I will take Hillary's record fighting for the average woman against anyone else's at this table or anyone else or any other candidate.
It's commendable.
She has been a champion, and I think actually the public will measure her by what she's done and what she will do and who she's fighting for. And if you look at her record and where she's been and where she was in the past, people believe her as a champion.
Erin,
there's no question that Hillary is a feminist icon, okay, and that she cares deeply about women around the globe and at home. However, I do want to express some concerns about an area where she isn't being vocal, where she needs to be, and that's specifically on abortion, is where a flag comes up for me. She was recently headlining an Emily's List gala. She never said the word abortion once. Meanwhile, here in this country, we've got people traveling down, crossing the Mexico border to get pills to self-abort because of the restrictiveness of the laws. And so we have a huge problem when, in fact, here in Arkansas recently, a House committee passed a bill using Hillary's own words of safe and rare to restrict access to medication abortion. So this is an area where I think her campaign has a lot of room to grow.
But right now, don't you think it would be dangerous for her to start talking about that? I mean, there'll be plenty about it during the campaign, but it's just like Republicans would avoid issues that are real minefields for them.
No, we say we're pro-life, but I think she's just taking you for granted, to be frank with you. I think she thinks that you'll be there no matter what.
She believes in you might not agree with all the
She believes in there are no restrictions.
She believes in safe
name one restriction.
One
restriction.
One talking at a time, please. Go ahead.
Okay, if you look
and we
at
got
her
to get out of here.
Of judicial bypass and for teens, etc. So,
sex selection abortion, yes or no? Taxpayer-funded abortion, yes or no?
Hillary has advocated against sex selection abortion around the world. She's been one of the champions.
And
she's talked about
for her to run for president.
Okay, and great, because she's talked about it when she's talked about China and Czechoslovakia. Great speech. I'm glad you've seen them.
Okay, great. We're out of time on that topic. From Hillary Clinton to war no more. Is the so-called war on women over or resurging? This week, Democrats once again accused the GOP of waging a war on women, this time for the delay in passing an anti-trafficking bill. Democrats blame a Republican ban on federal funds for abortions hidden in the bill for the delay. They're also furious over the protracted confirmation hearings of Loretta Lynch, who is slated to become the first black female attorney general. But Republicans, including TTC panelists Kellyanne Conway and Rina Shah, at an event this week titled War No More, said the war is over and don't expect a repeat during the next election. Potential GOP presidential candidate Carly Fiorina charged Democrats marginalize Republican women.
Emily's List, the pro-abortion women's group, came out and described Joni Ernst, a sitting senator, a mother, a wife, a veteran, as window dressing.
Okay, so from a PR perspective, from a strategic perspective, if you hold a news conference, say the war is over, isn't that admitting to the public that there was this war, and then there can be a debate over whether it's over or not?
I don't know. I don't agree with that. I don't think there's been an admission. I think there's talk, and I think this was a dialogue, the War No More panel, which unfortunately I was sad to miss you at. But I think it was a perfectly good venue to have people like our leaders, Kathy McMorris Rogers, who's been a champion of women's issues within the House. She's a chair of the GOP conference, and I think it's a dialogue about what we can be as a Republican Party. We can be champions for women's issues, which are everyone's issues.
I would love to see that happen. Unfortunately, that's not the reality of what we're dealing with. The war on women is something that has existed for a very long time, and it is still very much in effect. And this idea that it's stale, that it's not going to work in the next election cycle, well, the reality is that even if you look at some of the races in the most recent election where Senate seats were lost from Democrats to Republicans, the margin of loss was much smaller, where there was a heavier message focusing on women's reproductive rights. I'm specifically talking about North Carolina. And so that's something to look at. The tide was with Republicans last election, but this is an area where they are vulnerable.
The War No More, the reason it's called that, I didn't name it, but I understand why they call it that. It's to say that this whole cynical ploy to talk to women from the waist down only has failed. It failed miserably in 2014, where there were not close races in places like Colorado, where the Denver Post, of all places, withdrew their endorsement from incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Udall and called him Mark Uterus because he basically was a one-note Johnny. He got 39% of the male vote. So not only did women reject it, not only is Cory Gardner now the U.S. Senator from Colorado because he took on Mark Udall on this issue and others, but men resented it and rejected it. Same thing with the aforementioned Joni Ernst. Yes, first woman to ever represent Iowa in Congress, a pro-life female Republican who kept Bruce Braley to 40% of the male vote. So I think if Mrs. Clinton runs on this in 2016, this sort of abortion contraception, you even heard in the context of this panel today, the obsession with abortion, even when it's not an issue that she raised, is so myopic that it's almost the only language they speak.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree. If Hillary runs, or in the Democratic conversation, it'll be broader than choice issues. But I think this week we saw an example of how it's Republicans who are fixated on abortion, since they're holding up a sex trafficking bill because of abortion restriction, which is a very bipartisan bill. They're holding that up because of abortion language. Abortion restriction bills have been at the top of the agenda. So I'm sorry, it's not the Democratic Party obsessed with abortion and all these issues. It's the Republican Party, who have a majority now and want to sneak abortion restrictions and language in bills that have nothing to do with it.
Why did Planned Parenthood spend $100 million in the last election?
Why won't Mitch McConnell take the abortion language out and pass the sex trafficking bill, a bill which many Republicans have supported? But he won't take the language out. Why won't he? Who's obsessed with abortion then?
Why not affirm Loretta Lynch for that
looking
matter?
Forward in 2016, is this battle going to keep going? And it's not just in the national legislature and Congress, it's also at the state level. As Erin mentioned, there are 3 Republican state legislatures that have passed bills saying you can't use medical abortion, chemical abortions. So is that going to keep going? And will it be a winner for which party?
No party's going to win on this, because when there's hypocrites on both sides, unfortunately, and with the Democrats doing so, I think that's a big issue.
All right, we're out of time. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, we'll see you next week.